All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. When we think about the epic struggle for India's independence, there are a few names that instantly come to mind, right? But today, we are going to unpack the story of a man who brought a completely different, incredibly radical dimension to that fight. Born in 1897 to Janaki Nath Bose, who was a prominent lawyer, and Prabhavati Devi, Subhas Chandra Bose grew up in a wealthy, really well-educated Bengali family. But he didn't exactly choose a life of quiet comfort. Instead, he transformed into this gutsy, revolutionary youth icon who literally traveled the globe to build an army and try to shatter the British Empire. The violence is bad, but being a slave to violence is even worse. Take a second to really think about the philosophy behind that quote. Bose wasn't just someone who initially sought out armed conflict for the fun of it. His worldview was incredibly pragmatic. Under the guidance of Chittaranjan Das, Bose officially joined the Indian National Congress in 1921 and just completely threw himself into the non-cooperation movement. We're talking massive boycotts of British goods, schools, courts, and he gathered this huge volunteer support in Calcutta. Naturally, his sheer effectiveness caught the attention of the British authorities, which led to his first arrest. But getting hit with a 6-month jail sentence, it didn't deter him at all. It actually forged him into a much more formidable leader. So that brings us to a pretty bold question. Who was the real Superman of India's independence? As we navigate through this explainer together, I really want you to keep this thought in the back of your mind. Because while mainstream history loves to highlight the peaceful resistance that eventually led to 1947, Bose, who is affectionately known as Netaji, took an alternative, entirely uncompromising approach. He believed that liberating his people required actively, aggressively dismantling colonial power, and he was willing to sacrifice absolutely everything to make it happen. This ideological divide pretty much defined the era. On one hand, you had Mahatma Gandhi's famous philosophy of non-violent civil disobedience. But on the other hand, you had Bose, who firmly believed that if India truly wanted complete independence, non-violence alone just wasn't going to cut it. He argued that militant, armed resistance was absolutely essential. Now, as you can imagine, this radical stance made him a massive target. In 1925, he was actually imprisoned in Mandalay, Burma, without a trial. The conditions were brutal, and he even contracted severe tuberculosis while he was there. But you really cannot keep a deeply motivated man down. Even after battling TB, his influence somehow surged, and he ended up being triumphantly elected as the mayor of Calcutta in 1930. Okay, moving right along to Section 1, the Great Global Escape. So by 1940, the British considered Bose such a dangerous agitator that they placed him under strict house arrest at his Elgin Road residence in Kolkata. But trying to keep Netaji confined was practically impossible. In January 1941, he executed this absolute masterclass of an escape plan right under the noses of his guards. It literally plays out like a spy movie. First, with the help of his nephew, he disguised himself as an Afghan insurance agent named Mohammad Ziauddin and slipped away in a German-made car. Then, when he crossed into Afghanistan, thanks to local supporters like Mian Akbar Shah, he ran into a problem. He didn't speak the local Pashto language. His brilliant solution? He just feigned being completely deaf and mute to avoid detection. Later, an Italian ambassador in Kabul helped him get a brand new identity and an Italian passport under the name Count Orlando Mazzucato. And the sheer geographical scale of this journey is just staggering. Keep in mind, this is during the height of the Second World War. In just a few months, he traveled from Kolkata to Peshawar, crossed the rugged Afghan border to Kabul, somehow secured a transit visa through the Soviet Union using Soviet and Italian contacts, and finally arrived in Berlin, Germany by April 1941. This wasn't just him running away to safety. It was a highly calculated, strategic mission to secure heavy military backing for India's freedom. Which brings us to his highly controversial, yet strictly pragmatic diplomacy in Europe. Look, Bose's primary objective was to unite radical organizations and turn up the heat on the British Empire. To do that, he met with a variety of global leaders. He met Ireland's Eamon de Valera to study his methods of resistance. He engaged with Italy's Benito Mussolini to observe his administrative discipline. And yes, ultimately he met with Germany's Adolf Hitler. Now, it's really important to note from our source material that Bose had actually publicly criticized Nazi racism and Hitler's views on India back in 1936. But driven by this burning desire to free India, he put those ideological differences aside. He went on to establish the Free India Center and Azad Hind Radio right there in Germany to push his cause forward. Fast forward to 1943. The global theater of war was shifting, and Bose realized he needed to reach East Asia to collaborate with Japan.
But how on earth do you cross the globe when Allied navies are patrolling literally every inch of the ocean? Well, you go underneath them. For 71 terrifying, claustrophobic days, Bose traveled underwater. He secretly departed Germany on the U-180 submarine, navigated all the way through the North Sea and the Atlantic, and arrived in Madagascar. Then, in this insane mid-ocean transfer, he boarded the Japanese I-29 submarine to finish his journey to Indonesia. It absolutely remains one of history's most daring wartime missions.
Let's dive into Section 2, Building the National Army. When Bose finally arrived in East Asia, Japan had just defeated Britain in the Battle of Singapore and taken thousands of prisoners of war. And the sheer number of POWs they handed over to him is incredible. Captain Mohan Singh transferred leadership of roughly 40,000 Indian troops straight to Bose. Under Netaji's highly dynamic command, these men were completely transformed. They went from defeated prisoners to the highly motivated Indian National Army, the INA. They weren't fighting for the British anymore. They were training to march back to India and liberate it themselves. And Bose didn't just stop at building an army. He literally built an entire provisional state. In October 1943, over in Singapore, he established the Azad Hind government, which actually got official recognition from Axis powers. This wasn't just a symbolic thing. This sophisticated government had its own currency, its own stamps, and even its own civil code. Plus, in a move that was incredibly groundbreaking for the time, he established the Rani of Jhansi Regiment. He firmly believed women had to be equally involved in India's liberation, so he created this all-women combat unit led by Captain Lakshmi Swaminathan. It started with 170 cadets and quickly grew to about 300 highly trained fighters. And that leads us to Section 3, the climax and the enigma. By 1945, the tides of war had drastically turned against the Axis. The INA had run into severe logistical nightmares and heavy counterattacks from Allied forces at Kohima. Over in Europe, Germany surrendered, and those devastating nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced Japan to do exactly the same. With his powerful allies fallen, Bose needed to pivot yet again, this time hoping to seek Soviet support for India. On August 16, 1945, he started a frantic final flight from Singapore over to Saigon. Then, on the morning of August 18th, he boarded a Japanese bomber aiming for Manchuria. The plane stopped in Taipei, Taiwan, for a quick refuel. But shortly after takeoff, tragedy struck. The plane crashed. Netaji, whose clothes were completely soaked in aviation fuel, suffered fatal third-degree burns. Despite 6 agonizing hours of medical treatment by Dr. Tenyoshi Yoshimi, Subhas Chandra Bose officially died on August 18th. Or did he? The Japanese radio formally announced his death, and ashes were supposedly sent to the Renkoji Temple in Tokyo. But here's the thing, neither the Indian public nor his own family believed it, largely because his body was never handed over. This intense, widespread public doubt sparked multiple conflicting government investigations. Now, the 1956 Shah Nawaz Committee supported the plane crash theory. But fast forward to the 1999 Mukherjee Committee, which was led by a retired Supreme Court judge. After a 6-year inquiry, they dropped an absolute bombshell. They concluded that Netaji did not actually die in that Taiwan plane crash, and the ashes in Japan are not his. But wait, it gets crazier. The Indian government controversially rejected this report in 2005, which, as you can imagine, only added endless fuel to the fire. And you know, where there is an absence of absolute truth, theories always rush in to fill the void. The mystery surrounding his disappearance has spawned some of the most compelling unsolved conspiracy theories in modern history. First up is the death hoax theory, the idea that Bose faked the crash so he could secretly fly off and keep fighting for independence from the shadows. Then there is the incredibly famous Gumnami Baba theory. This one suggests Bose actually lived under a disguised identity as a monk in Faizabad, Uttar Pradesh all the way until 1985. Then you've got people who speculate he was taken into Soviet captivity. And finally, there's the much darker political assassination theory, suggesting rival politicians had him eliminated post-independence. Though, to be fair, there is zero credible evidence for that specific claim. Which leaves us right here, staring at one of history's absolute greatest enigmas. While the physical evidence heavily points to him dying in that tragic plane crash, the undeniable heroism, the sheer audacity, and the countless master escapes of his past just make us wonder, did Netaji really perish in the flames that day in Taipei? Or did the man who literally fooled the entire British Empire pull off one final ultimate escape? Regardless of how his story actually ended, his legacy as a fierce, uncompromising lion of India's independence remains completely unforgettable. Think about that as you process everything we've covered today. Until next time, keep exploring the untold truths of our history.